Well, it didn't take long until after I put up the video for Sonic Execution to release an update that immediately had me rethink some of the things I said. So we'll go over real quick what issue 1 has made me reconsider about not just this fan series, but the franchise as a whole. And while I'm here, I might as well cover a couple other things I left out, but have since been expanded on. To start with, one of my concerns about Sonic Execution was that a focus on the fighting going on in the then current releases for Chaos Emerges risked leaving out chances for characterization, world building, or in general, letting people see something besides the fighting and violence that would be interesting to them. Now, when I say that, I don't mean everything has to come to a screeching halt so someone can monologue and have a flashback or something. Short scenes can share a lot in storytelling mediums of all kinds. The side comic of Sunky and other EXEs lounging around while the fight is going on against Fleetway Supersonic signified to me that they were aware of that. And while Chaos Emerges in issue 1 do have similar scenes of everyday life being interrupted by the incoming cataclysm, I realized that to get this scene across properly, you have to understand what the everyday life being interrupted would even be to begin with. But this is more than just knowing what the canon or fan stories and characters are to reference. While thinking about issue 1, it actually made me realize a couple more things about not just the fan comic and Sonic villains, but also the Sonic franchise as a whole. Now, in Chaos Emerges, beams come down and blow people up in the middle of panicking. Effectively, the universes shown were just sacrifices lined up for the story's needs, or at least come off like that. In issue 1, however, we get a few pages of stuff like Amy and Rouge in the middle of shopping with others, and Sonic lounging on a beach. Before the panicking and fighting starts, in 2 pages we get an idea of not just what the world is like, but the characters as well. We get back to confrontations and fighting pretty quickly, but now we know a little more about the characters doing the fighting. Outside the EXEs at least, but I think portraying these ones, at least, as extra-dimensional monsters that look like Sonic and want to terrorize and destroy everything, fits the bill for nearly all of them, no matter the stories they come from. Now, in the story so far, various EXEs are attacking the city while Sonic himself is being confronted by Xenophanes. And it was at this point I realized something that I needed to share about Sonic and interacting with EXEs. Canonically, in official stories, all versions of Sonic have had to deal with some fashion of eldritch monsters. Most specifically, I want to point out Mephiles from Sonic.exe. Mephiles was an eldritch evil that copied the look of Sonic. He looks like Shadow! As I said, looks like Sonic. That was manipulative, had multiple dangerous powers, was actually able to kill Sonic, and was able to bring destruction and ruin to the entire world. Sound familiar? I'm not sure the chaos and destruction is atypical to the canon either. Chaos wrecked at least a city in Sonic Adventure 1. The moon is supposed to have a chunk of it missing since Sonic Adventure 2, and in Sonic Unleashed, the whole damn world was shattered. The more I think about it and talk about it, the more I feel like Sonic Execution, or EXE characters in general, aren't too far off from what an actual Sonic story could be or has been. Aside from the extreme violence, anyway. I think, though, what I've come to realize is that Sonic villains and Sonic Execution are working so well for the same reason. Sonic the Hedgehog is a character-based franchise and world. Sonic worked in his live-action movies because the world he was in didn't matter. His character and the characterization of the rest of the gang is what mattered. Which is why most of the other humans in the movie were unnecessary and continue to be so, but that's for another time. To put it another way, the Looney Tunes can be put in any situation or setting and work as long as they stay true to being the Looney Tunes. The Duck Dodgers series, Tiny Toons Adventures, and the Back in Action movie with Brendan Fraser being examples of it working. Lunatics Unleashed, well, just from this image you can tell it didn't work. And this extends back to the fan comic and what I think makes EXEs, at least the decent ones, work. EXEs don't work better in visual mediums like I've said previously. They work best when treated as characters. The original story sucked because in the end the character was Tom, and he was only there to be the victim in a spooky story. X could have been replaced with a Ghost of the Mailman with the same result. Or hell, even not just a ghost, could have just been a psycho mailman. I loved Needlemouse because Sarah and the others were characters and were treated as such. Remember when I said in Execution the EXEs were able to act as the threats they were supposed to be? That's the characters directing the story, not the story directing the characters. And overall, that's what makes Execution, Sonic Villains, and all those Sonic games and comics, canon or otherwise, work for so many people even to this day. Back to Execution, Sonic is acting as he generally would and fighting off Xenophanes while being nonchalant the whole time. He's dealt with worse, and I get the feeling that's not an exaggeration. But he's still confused over it, and Xenophanes teleports him to a pocket dimension. That's as far as I'll go for the new comic, aside from pointing out this scene as a reference to what I understand was going to be the final song in the Friday Night Funkin' mod. As a commenter pointed out, though, there was another reference I was ignorant of in the Chaos Emerges comics. Commenter Lara Prisma mentioned a part of this scene, I'm not sure, but I think it's this one, referenced Ghost of the Future, a fan comic from one of the IDW Sonic artists. Now, there are a couple final things I want to go over and expand on real quick at this time, so let's touch on them. In the original video, I meant to go into the comic's depiction of the multiverse. Well, one of the new things they posted on Twitter was another expanded description of how it worked. They compare it to the central finite curve from Rick and Morty, which, if you don't get the reference, I'll put it this way. You have the main or prime universe, and everything branches off of or connects back to it. Or at least in this case, there's 3 prime universes. Omega for the games, Alpha for the comics, and Zeta for the live-action stuff. And the further down the links you go, the more things change. To the point Revenant's universe is toward the bottom, implying there might be no talking animals, but their characterizations or spirits are taking the forms of humans. To put it more clearly, someone in Revenant's universe, if not Revenant himself, has some fashion of Sonic's character within them, even though they look like a human. Now, all these universes are connected to each other, but they're surrounded by effectively a wall to protect them from the void between other dimensions. But it does have an access point for other universes to cross over with it. To think of it this way, the multiverses are islands, and the void is a turbulent ocean, only able to safely access other multiverses in a presumably natural manner when the gaps in their walls get close enough to provide passage. Now, I know the official Sonic comics have their own setups for multiverses. Sonic the Zone Cop is a real thing after all, but I don't know enough to know if any of this is inspired from those comics and official lore, or if this is the Team's own thing. In terms of the EXEs and other void monsters leaking in, this breach in the wall appears to be where the access for them is coming from, including Lord X. What this means, from what I can see, is that Lord X invaded a Game Sonic universe, but not the Prime Game universe. And I wonder if that means anything about the amount of power he got from the vessel he possessed. Speaking of multiverses, there's a few other stories and comics the team is working on. I didn't bring these up because I didn't think they were tied to Sonic Execution, at least directly enough to discuss, but it turns out they are. Meaty's Resto, I had a strong feeling took place after Sonic Execution, though, since what looks like Silver's final form, teased for Execution, shows up as the goddess that forced a monster called the Beast, which I think may be based off this character, but not sure, into a form of penance by running a restaurant in hell, or close enough to hell to be called that. Media's Resto I'm actually very interested in seeing more of, because in the opening pages, it was very quick to lay down what the characters were like as they were talking to each other. Even this weird sentient acid trip brings character to things. Now I saw, but can't find again, a drawing of the menu for this place being cooked up parts of Sonic characters. So I can only assume who a regular patron of the place would be. Yes, they have a comic on Starved as well, and this one I thought was a side story, but is explicitly a prequel to everything else, including Chaos Emerges. It gives a terrifying look at how the Starved character operates, and oh boy. If you remember from my Sonic.exe video, I found Starved to be one of the most intriguing and frightening characters from that mod, for the simple reason that, in general, he was nothing more than a hunter taken to the most psychotic extremes. He wants to eat all the animals, including the sentient and talking ones, and the comic portrays his final victim being Sonic himself, so that his victory can not just be eating Sonic, but mentally breaking him as well. Now this goes against what I understood his backstory to be in the Friday Night Funkin' mod, where Sonic was eaten before Tails, but I really don't feel like nitpicking that because, again, they're using the characters to great effect in a horror story. It's a very brutal and horrifying comic that really puts forward how incredibly evil Starved is. Now, for more information about the timeline and such, the team has released an image showing the eras of the canon they're working off of, and it looks like there's a ton more ideas they have besides just a giant brawl against EXEs. The team is also working on an alternate universe encyclopedia of sorts. I think mainly focused on their own idea, but it still seems pretty interesting, where one of the universes takes place 6 years after the games. And among other things, Sonic is settled down and married to Amy. Sally Acorn, technically not in the games, but it's not like she couldn't have been in the background somewhere, is together with Nicole. Tails is a scientist, Knuckles an explorer. Shadow and Rouge are a bit more together and helping Cream out with college. And Robotnik has finally given up on being evil and has decided instead to help people as a tinkerer, which is something that he actually did for a little bit in, I believe, the IDW comics. And once more, I'm bringing up the point that this all sounds completely believable and natural for the characters, because we've seen what the characters are up to this point. I mean, especially Robotnik. If he can build a space station, it's only his ego that makes him want to take over the planet instead of just build his own place somewhere else. They've also announced 2 novels official to the project, and judging from the write-ups I saw about Revenant and their version of Fleetway Supersonic, I think they might come out decent. They've also released a bit more lore about Silver. She comes from the same dimension as Sally Alt, with her mother being one of the highest-ranking royal guards and her father being a farmer. She has a sister, too, named Gold, but in the end I got a bad feeling about what this all leads to. This team is really making me interested in their characters. And if it's shown in the comic or not, there is a lot of thought and effort they put into them. And the funny thing about characters is, when you put a lot of thought into what's behind the scenes for them, even if it's not explicitly discussed, little things from that can still come to the forefront in the character's portrayal, which would help people piece this stuff together on their own. This is something that I'll explore more in the Shane video coming up, so I won't delve too much more into it here, but I think you all can see what I'm trying to say there. Now, a couple things from the original video that I do need to address. Not so much mistakes, but I feel on my side they're more like oversights. I mentioned there were other good guy exes besides anti-DLL. I planned to show the drawing they shared on their Twitter page, giving examples of them, but I guess I got too distracted by how awesome the anti-DLL video looked. Now, I don't know who these characters are specifically, but recently I tried to look them up on the continued wiki I keep mentioning, and stumbled upon a new favorite of the EXEs, Firewall. This is an EXE-styled program Sega themselves actually created and put in all their games because they noticed all the EXEs showing up and wanted to have a defense against them. So if you're playing any Sonic game and nothing creepy happens, it's because this thing is in there successfully beating up the bad things. Like I said before, a lot of my interest in the EXE characters comes from the concepts more than the actual stories. And that ties into what I was getting into earlier about the characters. Also, another shout out and revisit to Sega Girl's fan dub of the comics. And as I was watching the videos play through on the live stream I had recently, I had a major realization. And I really need to address and kind of apologize about what I said when I compared them to the Sonic Villains team. I friggin' forgot I was comparing a fan dub to what was at least partially a professional voice acting team. So keep in mind that when I said they were on the heels of Villains' quality and had a better done Fleetway Supersonic, allow me to stress the importance of that being taken as a higher praise than what it may have come off as in the original video. Now recently there was also another creator that made a fan dub of the Starved comic, Seafoam. And what are my thoughts on that one? Well, let me start by saying voice acting is hard. And allow what I'm saying to also apply to not just the team that worked on Sega Girl's video, but also Sega Villains and all voice acting.
Every single one of my friends gone. He finally broke me. Whoa. Too weak to move. Just do it, Robotnik. Just end me.
Yes, Father.
How would you scream? Or how hard you cry? No one will hear you.
It's a balancing act of not just sounding like the character looks or seems like they should, but also making sure they sound natural in their emotions and inflections. How a character sounds is more than just their voice, but what the voice conveys. In the end, I think Seafoam is doing a good job. And one of the replies mentions audio mixing issues, and I'm kind of neutral on the voices themselves if I was just going off sound alone. But the speech patterns are very well done. You can feel the emotion and eventual resignation Sonic is going through, and the pure malice from Robotnik. Mint Midori did the voice of Sage, who is Eggman's kind of daughter as of the game Sonic Frontiers, so she is canon in the games. Now, she only gets one line in the comic, but she still sounds pretty good. Overall, the Starved dub is a little rough, but in my opinion, Seafoam is focusing on the right things as a voice actor. Practicing making sure the emotions get through before practicing making the voice work. To put it this way, Sonic in this or any other dub could sound like he has smoker's lung, but if he still comes off as sincere in what he's saying, it would be good voice work in my opinion. Now, this is the wrap-up, and so I'll summarize what I've been saying about the characters with this. The characters in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise will always be able to have stories surrounding them, because they're characters. Sonic may have started life in the Genesis games as a mascot for Sega as an answer for Mario. However, over time, Sonic and the rest of the franchise have become less of mascots than the Mario characters have become. I know some people might not agree with me on that, but I think it explains why Mario can fit into the tennis, soccer, dancing, etc. games better than Sonic can. People are used to Sonic acting in certain ways, while Mario can be used in multiple different ways. None of this is arguing that Sonic and friends are strong characters. It'll always depend on the writing. But I think we're used to seeing the Sonic characters have a sort of agency of their own whenever they're used in anything. If a Sonic character winds up as something other than an observer or an extra, it can be expected that they'll be acting a certain way, and that the ways that they will generally predictably act will have some kind of place in whatever story or game they're involved in. The Sonic Execution team is very open to questions and comments on their Twitter page, so go check them out if you've got anything you're curious about. Also, to the Revenant and DevArts, thank you very much for reaching out to me and giving me a chance to talk to you. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize you did it and get back to you about it, but I'm still an idiot with some parts of all this social media stuff, and I'm kind of learning this crap as I'm going along. And even though we've talked a little bit, I don't want to take away too much time from you guys. You look like you've been plenty busy enough as it is, and that's certainly something commendable for creatives or a creative team. Just don't work yourselves into another extended hiatus. You're doing great so far, and you don't need to push yourselves further, even if your heart is into it. And if I didn't make it clear in the Sonic Villains and Sonic Execution video, remember that you guys too can keep this kind of thing on your resume. Making fan creations and how you approach them is still something that can be seen as professional after all. So as I've said before, great work to the Sonic Execution team, and I really do look forward to seeing what else is coming. Take care, everybody.